Imagine knowing with absolute certainty that your child understands every single thing you say to them.
Yeah, you can just see it in their eyes, right?
Exactly. You see it in how they react to, like, a subtle joke or how they anticipate exactly what's going to happen next in the room. But, and here's the really heartbreaking part. When they try to respond, the motor pathways, they just refuse to cooperate.
Right. They literally cannot speak a single word.
Not a single word. So how do you even begin to bridge that massive gap? And perhaps even more daunting, how do you ensure the rest of the world sees this brilliant, complex mind that's locked inside?
It's so hard, especially in public.
Right. Especially when you're just, trying to get through the supermarket and some stranger walks up and asks a deeply intrusive question like, what's wrong with them? Welcome to today's deep dive.
It is an intense daily reality, I mean, truly. And it requires a level of relentless advocacy that, frankly, most people they cannot fathom unless they're living it themselves.
Completely. And that is exactly who we are talking to today. We are immersing ourselves entirely in the world of PURA syndrome. We've got clinical diagnostic criteria. We've pulled the very latest 2026 research updates.
Which are incredible, by the way.
Oh, absolutely mind-blowing. And we also have hospital planning protocols, plus those dense, often totally infuriating legal frameworks for education, health, and care plans.
Yeah, the EHC plans, a nightmare for so many.
So true. But our mission today is singular, right? This deep dive is custom tailored for you, a parent, the carer, the resident expert of a child with PURA.
Because you already know your child's baseline way better than any neurologist on the planet, honestly.
Right. You know their triggers.
Exactly. You know their specific signs of joy. They're really subtle indicators of distress. So what we are doing today is taking all this current medical literature, the legal strategies, the cutting-edge genetic science, and transforming it into a practical toolkit.
Like for your next hospital admission.
Right. Or your next annual review.
We're going to get right into the weeds here. We're going to look at how the latest science explains your child's developmental profile and how to actually command a room of medical professionals. Because while this path can feel profoundly isolating, the reality is, you are a part of a highly mobilized, fiercely intelligent global community.
Yeah, and to really command that room of specialists, I mean, it helps so much to understand the precise mechanics of what is happening at a cellular level.
Not just knowing the diagnosis, but the why.
Exactly, the biological why behind it all.
So let's start right there at the genetic foundation. PURA is this incredibly rare neurodevelopmental disorder, but the thing that always strikes me is the timeline. I mean, this condition was first described in the medical literature in 2014.
Right, basically yesterday in medical terms.
Literally yesterday. And right now we're looking at around, 700 to 800 identified cases globally, though, that curve is steepening really rapidly as whole exome sequencing becomes more accessible.
Yeah, that 2014 date is crucial context, I think, because it's not like PURA syndrome just suddenly materialized out of nowhere a decade ago.
Right.
It's that we finally developed the technological lens to actually see it. Before whole exome sequencing became, a standard diagnostic tool, which basically allows us to proofread the entire protein coding region of a person's DNA, these kids are just placed into broad, descriptive buckets.
Like those catch-all labels.
Exactly. Severe global developmental delay.
Or like atypical cerebral palsy or profoundly autistic, right?
Yes. Which means there is an entire generation of adults currently living in care facilities right now or being supported by aging parents who carry those generic diagnoses but are actually walking around with PURA syndrome.
Wow. So they just missed the technological window for an accurate genetic diagnosis when they were kids.
Exactly that. The diagnostic landscape has just completely shifted now. We can finally pinpoint the exact location. It's a mutation or a deletion of the PURA gene on chromosome 5.
Specifically at the 5q31.3 band, right?
Spot on. And the most common pathogenic variant we see in the literature is P5333del. But honestly, regardless of the specific spelling mistake in the DNA, the biological consequence is essentially this state called haploinsufficiency.
Okay, let's pause on haploinsufficiency because I want to make sure we really visualize this correctly. I've heard it described in the past as building a house with only half the bricks, but I actually think that's a bit too static of an image.
Interesting, yeah.
To me, reading the sources, it feels much more like a city's public transit system.
Oh, how so?
Well, so the body has 2 copies of the PURA gene, right? And when one is mutated or deleted, you're only producing half of the necessary pure alpha protein.
Right, the 50% drop.
Yeah. So if pure alpha is the transit network, the trains, the dispatchers, the tracks, and you suddenly cut the fleet by 50%, the city doesn't just disappear.
Right, people are still there.
Exactly. The buildings are still there, people still try to get to work, the body still physically develops. But the infrastructure is permanently stressed. Like, routes are delayed, signals get missed, and the fundamental timing of the whole city is altered.
I actually really prefer that to the brick analogy. That's great.
Oh, thanks.
Because, per-alpha protein is highly dynamic. It's deeply involved in regulating how messenger RNA, which are basically the instructions for building the brain, is transported along the cytoskeletal scaffolding of nerve cells.
Okay.
So it's basically the logistics network for neuronal development. Without enough of it, the trains carrying those vital instructions get stuck at the station.
Wow. Okay, so the dendrites don't form correctly.
Exactly. The neural pathways are laid down, yeah, but they are inefficient, or they're totally misrouted.
And the downstream effects of that compromised transit system, we can see those from the literal moment the child is born.
Yes, very clearly.
We see that classic neonatal triad, right? The profound hypotonia, the hypothermia, and the hypersomnolence, plus that severe dysphagia that usually necessitates an NG or a G-tube right out of the gate.
Which is incredibly scary for a new parent.
Right. Absolutely terrifying. But wait, I want to challenge something here from the reading. I understand how a lack of protein affects brain wiring. But why does a genetic brain mutation cause a newborn's core physical body temperature to plummet? Like, why is the physical thermostat broken?
Well, because the brain isn't just a thinking machine, right? It is the autonomic control center for the entire physiological organism. And the epicenter for that control is the brainstem.
Okay, the brainstem.
Right. The autonomic nervous system handles literally everything you don't consciously control. So, heart rate, digestion, respiration, and crucially, temperature regulation.
Oh, I see.
Because the pure-alpha protein deficiency impairs that early neuronal migration and wiring, the brainstem itself essentially misfires.
So the signals from the brainstem to the blood vessels, telling them to constrict to preserve heat, those signals are just too weak.
Precisely. The signal just degrades. And it's the exact same mechanism for the hypersomnolence.
Excessive sleepiness.
Yeah. The reticular activating system, which is what governs wakefulness and arousal, it isn't getting the right chemical or electrical prompts. So the baby isn't just, tired. Their neurological on switch is actually malfunctioning.
That makes so much sense.
This autonomic dysregulation is why these early months are so clinically terrifying. The foundation of the autonomic system is just fundamentally unstable.
And then, as they survive that neonatal period and start to grow, the clinical picture evolves, doesn't it? We start seeing the severe to profound intellectual disabilities. We see visual impairments like strabismus or myopia.
Right.
And of course, the drug-resistant epilepsy, which becomes this lifelong shadow for so many of these families.
It really does dominate a lot of their medical care.
But here's the thing that really trips me up when I'm looking at the clinical data. You can have two children, right? They both have the exact same variant, that identical P233del mutation we talked about.
Yes.
Yet one of them might eventually walk with a gait trainer, while the other is completely non-ambulatory and has far, far more severe seizures. If the genetic spelling mistake is totally identical, why is the clinical reality so vastly different?
Yeah, that is the ultimate frustration of modern genetics, honestly. We really want DNA to be the simple blueprint. We want to be able to say, here is the mutation, therefore here is the exact future.
Right, like reading a manual.
Exactly.
Right.
But the PURA gene does not operate in a vacuum. It constantly interacts with the other 20,000 plus genes in the human genome.
Okay.
We call this the genetic background. There are modifier genes that might, compensate slightly for the lack of pure alpha protein in one child, but those modifiers are absent in another child.
So it's basically the supporting cast of genes that alters the final outcome.
Yes. Add in environmental factors, the specific timing of when those early seizures start, the efficacy of really early interventions, all of it cascades. Doctors simply cannot look at a genetic assay and predict a child's trajectory with absolute certainty.
They just can't.
No, they have to embrace the ambiguity and treat the clinical presentation that's right in front of them, not just the genetic theory.
Embracing the ambiguity, I imagine that is incredibly hard for a parent sitting in a sterile neurologist's office just begging for answers.
Absolutely heart-wrenching.
But it also speaks to the profound resilience required to raise a child with PURA. Because beyond the physical and neurological baseline, The most significant everyday reality for these families is how their child interacts with the world.
Yeah, the communication piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that interaction is defined by this massive, often totally misunderstood divide.
You're talking about the receptive-expressive language discrepancy. It is arguably the single most defining cognitive feature of PURA syndrome.
It is staggering when you really look at the mechanics of it. We know delayed motor development is universal with this syndrome, but it's the communication piece that dominates daily life, isn't it? The vast majority of individuals with PURA are non-speaking.
Right. They may never produce functional spoken words.
But, and this is the absolute crux of the issue, I think, their receptive language, meaning their ability to process and comprehend what is actually happening around them, is light years ahead of their expressive language.
Completely. The cognitive processing centers, they are taking the information in. They hear you, they understand your tone, they recognize the daily routine. They can even follow simple and sometimes highly complex multi-step commands.
Like, go get the blue cup from the kitchen.
Exactly. But the expressive output, which, if you think about it, requires this incredibly intricate, synchronized dance of cranial nerves, vocal cords, tongue, lips, breath support, all of that is blocked by the underlying hypotonia and motor planning deficits.
I try to put myself in that psychological space, and it honestly takes my breath away.
It's a lot to process.
Imagine being fully aware. You're sitting at the dinner table. You know exactly what your sibling just said. You think it's hilarious, or maybe you're deeply upset because your stomach really hurts. And you try to express that, and your body basically acts as a soundproof vault.
Yeah, a soundproof vault. That's a powerful way to put it.
The sheer compounding frustration of that existence. I mean, it has to manifest somehow, right?
It absolutely does, and it manifests as behavior. We often see clinical notes describing children with PURA as highly sociable, very loving, engaging. But we also see really high rates of severe anxiety, sensory-seeking behaviors, and self-injury like hand-biting or head-banging.
Oh, wow.
And when a child engages in self-injury, the outside world often views it as just a symptom of intellectual deficit, like, oh, they just don't know better. But if we view it through the lens of this communication gap we're talking about, it is an entirely rational response to an irrational physical constraint.
Because they're trapped.
Exactly. If you cannot speak your pain or your fear or your overwhelming sensory overload, that energy has to escape the body somehow. Behavior is communication.
Behavior is communication. Man, that should be printed on the front page of literally every medical chart.
It really should, and this discrepancy is exactly why AC augmentative and alternative communication is not just like an educational add-on. It is a fundamental human right for these kids.
Right.
Early speech therapy isn't about forcing vocalizations that their motor pathways physically can't support. It's about unlocking the vault.
And that involves robust, high-tech, and low-tech systems, right? We are talking about PODD, Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display books.
Yes, the PODD books are incredible.
They allow a child to navigate these complex pathways of symbols to express highly specific thoughts, not just like basic needs like eat or drink. And then there are electronic eye gaze or touchscreen speech-generating devices.
The clinical anecdotes bear this out so beautifully in the data. Take Sarah, a 7-year-old in the dataset.
Oh, I remember reading about her.
Right. She has incredible receptive language, but virtually no spoken words. But the moment they integrated a PODD book and a digital device, her entire demeanor completely shifted. She is actively participating in her environment now. She found her voice.
That is amazing. And then there's the quote from the family of Aiden, a 14-year-old. The parents stated, and this is a direct quote, "We have learned from Aiden that being nonverbal is not the same thing as not being able to communicate."
It's such a profound realization, but, it requires the adults around them to completely recalibrate their definition of what language actually is.
Yeah, that's so true.
Because for a neurotypical child, progress is a relatively linear staircase, right? You go from babbling to single words to sentences. But for a child with PURA, progress is nonlinear and highly nuanced.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, reaching out to purposefully touch a specific icon on an iPad, modulating a vocalization to specifically mean no, or establishing intentional, sustained eye contact to confirm a choice, those are monumental, hard-won communication milestones.
Which brings up a deeply practical, everyday challenge. I want to talk about public perceptions, because it's something parents navigate constantly, and it ties right into this expressive gap.
Oh, the public interactions, yeah.
Right. So you're at the supermarket, your child is in their wheelchair, maybe they're vocalizing loudly or they're using an AAC device, and a stranger stares. Or worse, they walk right up to you in the produce aisle and ask, what's wrong with him? Or what's wrong with her?
It happens all the time.
How on earth does a parent handle that, knowing their child understands every single word of that incredibly awkward exchange?
It's an incredibly fraught moment. The instinct naturally might be to protect the child by just ignoring the person entirely, or perhaps lashing out of sheer exhaustion.
Which is totally understandable.
Completely understandable.
Yeah.
But the reality is, the child is watching the parent in that moment to see how their own existence is framed.
Right. If the parent acts ashamed or panicked, the child internalizes that shame.
Exactly. So the strategy shifts. It's not about agitating the stranger. Frankly, you don't owe a stranger a medical history at the grocery store.
Definitely not.
It's about modeling competence and respect for the child. Many parents actually develop a practice script for this. They might say very calmly, "There is nothing wrong with him. He has PURA syndrome, which means his muscles work differently, and he uses this device to speak."
I love that. So direct.
And then, crucially, the parent turns the interaction directly back to the child. They say, "Isn't that right, Aiden? Do you want to say hello to this person?"
Oh, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
You completely short-circuit the pity dynamic.
Yes.
You force the stranger to acknowledge the child as an active participant in the conversation, not just like an object of tragedy. It enforces that golden rule we see constantly in all the advocacy literature. Presume competence.
Presume competence. You assume the child understands you completely until proven otherwise. And you educate extended family members with this. You educate new teachers.
You have to train them, basically.
You do. You explicitly tell them, do not talk about her as if she isn't in the room. Speak to her directly and give her the processing time she needs to actually respond.
It is a full-time PR job on top of a full-time caregiving job.
It really is exhausting.
And nowhere is that PR job, that relentless advocacy, more critical than when you step out of the supermarket and step through the sliding doors of a pediatric hospital. Because eventually, the clinical realities of PURA just demand highly specialized care.
Which brings us to the acute reality of hospital admissions.
It is a completely different battleground. We're talking about frequent high-stakes visits, right? Like drug-resistant epilepsy monitoring, surgical placements for feeding tubes, severe respiratory infections, orthopedic interventions for scoliosis or hip dysplasia.
The list is endless.
It really is. The hospital essentially becomes an extension of the home, but it is an environment completely hostile to the child's sensory and autonomic needs.
And this is exactly where the Boston Children's Hospital planning protocols become so invaluable. They codify what parents inherently already know, that standard hospital operating procedures are often actively detrimental to a child with complex neurodevelopmental needs.
Yeah.
And the centerpiece of this protocol is the All About Me document.
Okay, when I first looked at this concept in the reading, I thought it was just like a nice getting to know you sheet, like, oh, Timmy likes Paw Patrol.
Right, a lot of people think that.
But it is not. It is a critical medical document. You hand this to the intake nurse, the anesthesiologist, the attending physician. It bypasses the sterile medical chart and provides the literal operational manual for your child.
Exactly.
It details their exact communication methods. But more importantly, it translates their behavioral triggers for a medical team that does not know them.
That translation is absolutely vital for patient safety. I mean, think about it. A rotating resident might look at a child with PURA who is suddenly thrashing around, arching their back, vocalizing really loudly, and they might just assume it's simply the baseline neurological presentation of the syndrome.
Right. That's just what these kids do.
Exactly, which is so dangerous. The All About Me document corrects that dangerous assumption. It explicitly states, if you see these specific behaviors, it means my child is in acute pain or they are terrified. It removes the guesswork that leads to undermedication for pain or, totally inappropriate psychiatric intervention.
It also establishes really hard boundaries. The packet includes a checklist for necessary medical accommodations, things that seem minor to a doctor but are catastrophic for the child.
Like what?
Like avoid rushing when entering the room, cluster care to limit the amount of times you check vitals so you aren't waking them up every hour, and one that ties right back to our communication discussion. Do not have medical or surgical conversations at the bedside.
Ah, yes, because of the receptive language gap.
Exactly. If the surgical team is standing over the bed, debating the risks of a spinal fusion, the child is absorbing every ounce of that clinical anxiety. They understand the fear, but they cannot ask clarifying questions to soothe themselves. The parent knows this, and the document forces the medical team to step out into the hallway.
That is so important. The protocol also leans heavily on social stories, which is another great tool. We know a hospital is a sensory nightmare, right? The fluorescent lights, the alarms going off constantly, the abrupt physical handling by strangers,
It's overwhelming for anyone.
let alone a child with sensory processing differences. So a social story is a customized visual guide, like a little book with photos, that prepares the child for what is about to happen.
Oh, like, today we are going to radiology.
Exactly. The machine will be very loud. You will have to hold still. It walks them through it.
But I have to ask, and I think a lot of parents wonder this, in an emergency setting, is there really time for a social story? Why is this prioritized so highly in the medical literature?
It's a great question. And the answer is because it is a physiological preventative measure. We have to go back to the autonomic dysregulation we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The child's nervous system is already highly fragile. If a stranger in a gown and mask suddenly approaches them with a needle without any cognitive framing, it induces sheer panic.
Right, fight or flight.
Yes, and that panic causes a massive surge in catecholamines stress hormones. Heart rate spikes, breathing becomes erratic. For a child with PURA, that sudden autonomic overdrive can easily trigger an epileptic cascade.
Oh, wow, so it can medically destabilize them.
Yes, taking 2 minutes to read a social story, allowing them to actually process the transition cognitively, is quite literally a clinical intervention to prevent a seizure.
That reframes it entirely. It's not about comfort, it's about stability. But man, the emotional toll of orchestrating all of this, the parent has to be the loving caregiver, the medical translator, the sensory buffer, and the administrative manager all at once.
It is an impossible load.
The clinical guides actually address this directly, which I appreciated. They advise running a hospital stay like a military operation, rotating shifts with a partner, appointing a designated spokesperson to manage the absolute onslaught of text messages from terrified grandparents and friends.
Yeah, that spokesperson strategy is crucial. It's about preserving the primary caregiver's finite cognitive bandwidth. When you are managing oxygen sats and medication schedules, you simply cannot spend 45 minutes emotionally managing your extended family's reactions to the latest scan results.
No, you just don't have the energy.
Yeah.
And you cannot afford to leave the room. There is a quote from Kevin O'Connor, a parent support navigator, that hit me like a ton of bricks when I read it.
What did he say?
He said, "We quickly learn that doctors always seem to arrive as soon as you step away, even for just a moment. It taught me to wait to take my walks until after rounds." The guilt and hypervigilance embedded in that statement.
It's palpable.
You are terrified to go get a cup of coffee because you might miss the neurologist you've waited 72 hours to see, or a new nurse might miss a really subtle sign of respiratory distress.
It really solidifies the concept of the parent as the resident expert. The medical system is highly compartmentalized. The pulmonologist focuses on the lungs. The neurologist focuses on the brain. The parent is the only person in that entire building who holds the holistic, unified picture of the child.
Which is why medical errors occur when specialists fail to communicate across those disciplines.
Yeah, exactly. The parent is the ultimate fail-safe safeguard.
But practically speaking, there is a massive power dynamic at play here. The white coat carries immense systemic authority. You're a parent, you're on hour 48 of no sleep. A senior attending physician breezes into the room, clearly rushed, and starts making sweeping decisions that you know aren't right for your child's baseline.
Yeah.
Setting a boundary in that moment feels impossible. How do you push back?
You utilize physical tools to alter the psychological dynamic of the room. The absolute best tool a parent can have is a dedicated physical medical notebook.
I love this strategy. It's so simple but so incredibly effective.
It really is.
Yep.
When that attending breezes in, you don't just nod and agree. You open a thick notebook, you uncap a pen, and you ask them to state their name and role, and you write it down right in front of them.
Wow.
You have a pre-written list of highly specific questions, and you take notes on their answers.
It changes the energy instantly, doesn't it?
Completely. It signals to the medical professional, I am not a passive recipient of your care. I am tracking the data, I am documenting the decisions, and I am holding you accountable.
It bridges that power gap. It acts as an emotional shield for the exhausted parent, allowing them to step into a professional managerial role.
Exactly.
But what if that documentation isn't enough? What if the care is genuinely inadequate, the child is deteriorating, and the immediate team is just being dismissive? Because unfortunately, we know that happens.
It does, and the clinical guides are very clear on this. You escalate. Every single parent must memorize the formal escalation pathways in their specific hospital.
Right.
In many regions, this is the RECH protocol: recognize, engage, act, call, help is on its way. It is a formalized system that allows families to independently trigger an urgent clinical review by an entirely separate rapid response team, bypassing the immediate doctors who aren't listening.
That is so
You
empowering.
have the fundamental, undeniable right to demand a second opinion. You are never trapped.
You are never trapped. I think someone listening to this right now really, really needed to hear that. You have the authority to pull the alarm. So the hospital is this acute, high adrenaline battleground, but there is another battleground that doesn't operate in hours and days, but in years and decades. And it is just as critical to the child's survival and thriving.
Educational advocacy, the absolute legal labyrinth of securing proper provision.
Oh man, yeah. Specifically, we need to dissect the EHC plan, the Education, Health, and Care Plan. For families in the UK and similar jurisdictions, this document is the absolute center of gravity for your child's future.
It is everything.
It is a legally binding contract that dictates exactly what support a local authority must provide. And the annual review of this plan is where the fiercest battles are fought.
And contract is the operative word there. An EHC plan is not a wish list. It is statutory.
Yeah.
But its power is entirely dependent on the precision of the language within it.
That's true.
The legal frameworks guide parents to forensically examine 3 distinct sections. Section B, which defines the child's special educational needs. Section F, which defines the provision of which dictates the targeted outcomes.
Let's laser in on Section F, the special educational provision. Because from reading the legal literature, this is where local authorities love to hide behind linguistic loopholes. The guidance screams at parents to eradicate vague terminology. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, so a poorly written Section F will use words like access to, opportunities for, regular, or as required.
Oh, I hate as required.
It's the worst. For example, the student will have access to regular speech and language therapy. That is legally useless.
Aye.
Because to an underfunded local authority, access to might mean the child is in a school where a therapist occasionally walks down the hall. Regular might mean once a term. You cannot take a local authority to a tribunal over the word regular.
Right, because it's totally subjective. It's designed to be unenforceable.
Exactly. A legally robust Section F must be quantified and specified and must state, the student requires 2 hours of direct 1.1 speech and language therapy per week, delivered in 30-minute sessions by a qualified speech and language therapist, specifically utilizing a PODD communication system.
Oh, wow. That is specific.
If that level of specificity is in the plan, it is a legal mandate. If the school misses a single week because of staffing issues, they are in breach of statutory duty and the parent has immediate legal recourse.
Ambiguity is the enemy of provision. You literally have to put on a lawyer's hat. You have to compile the evidence, the independent occupational therapy reports, the private neurological assessments, the school's own data, and, crucially, you have to inject the child's own voice into this sterile legal process.
Which is hard, but the statutory guidelines actually mandate a person-centered approach. Even if the child is entirely nonverbal, their views must be sought.
But how do you do that legally for a child with PURA who can't just speak up in a meeting?
Through really rigorous observation and documentation, you go back and use the All About Me framework. You document when Aiden is presented with a choice between physical therapy equipment, his eye gaze consistently indicates a preference for the standing frame.
I see.
That is the child's voice. You submit videos of them using their AC device. The child cannot be a passive subject of the EHE plan. They must be clearly defined as an active participant in their own outcomes.
But the emotional reality of doing this, I mean, the legal literature outlines the process, but it completely strips away the trauma of the annual review meeting itself.
It really is traumatic for families.
Think about what we are asking these parents to do. You spend 364 days a year presuming competence. You celebrate the micro milestones. You look at your child and you see light and potential and intelligence.
Yeah.
And then once a year, you have to walk into a fluorescent-lit conference room and legally argue that your child is profoundly, severely disabled. You have to hyper-focus on their deficits, their worst days, their complete inability to function independently, just to secure the funding they need to survive.
It is a brutal emotional paradox. It forces the parent to pathologize their own child. Reading a 30-page educational psychologist report that meticulously details every single thing your child cannot do is just soul-crushing.
It goes against every instinct of love. I think the only way to survive it is to mentally compartmentalize, To recognize that the annual review is basically a cynical, bureaucratic game. You use the system's language of deficit to extract the resources your child needs for abundance.
That's a great way to look at it.
But the system doesn't make it easy. The bureaucratic hurdles are staggering. Local authorities are bound by strict statutory deadlines. After an annual review, they have 4 weeks to inform you if they plan to amend the EHC plan.
Right.
If they decide to amend, they must issue the finalized document within 8 weeks of that decision. 12 weeks total.
But as the legal data overwhelmingly shows, those deadlines are routinely casually ignored by local authorities.
And this is where I get genuinely angry reading these legal guides. Because if a parent misses a deadline, they lose their right to appeal. But if the local authority misses a deadline, the child simply languishes.
There's zero accountability.
Right. If you are trying to secure a transition from a mainstream school that is totally failing your child into a specialized, highly supported setting, an 8-month delay from the local authority isn't just an inconvenience. It is the active theft of your child's developmental window.
Yes.
What actual power does a parent have when the government breaks its own laws?
You have the power of formal escalation in the tribunal system. You do not wait politely. If a deadline is missed, you immediately lodge a formal complaint citing the specific SEN Code of Practice statutes.
Don't just sit back.
Never sit back. And if they issue a final plan that you disagree with, say they refuse to specify the 1.1 support hours, or they name a school that clearly cannot meet the medical needs, you have the right to appeal to the SEN Tribunal.
Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal.
Okay.
Taking the local authority to court, which, let's be honest, sounds terrifying and incredibly expensive.
It is deeply intimidating, which is exactly why the legal literature emphasizes that parents should never do this alone. You lean heavily on services like Sendius, the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Information, Advice, and Support Services.
Right, the free services.
Yes, these are independent statutory services designed specifically to level the playing field. They understand the case law. They know exactly how to format an appeal. They provide the leverage a parent needs to force the local authority's hand, often resulting in the LA conceding before you ever even step foot in a tribunal room.
You have to fight fire with legal fire. But fighting the local authority, fighting the medical establishment, it is exhausting. It can feel like you are standing alone in the dark, just swinging at shadows. But the most vital takeaway from all of this literature is that you are not in the dark.
Absolutely not.
There is an entire infrastructure of families and scientists standing right beside you.
Which perfectly transitions us to the immense power of the global rare disease community and the staggering research horizon of 2026.
Let's start with the community architecture. The PURA Syndrome Foundation has built something incredible here. It's not just a website, it's an ecosystem. They have the Ambassador Program, connecting newly diagnosed families with veterans.
Which is so helpful in those early days.
They have sibling outreach, which is so crucial because the neurotypical siblings of medically complex children carry a unique, often very silent psychological load.
They really do.
They have grand POPS for the grandparents.
Right.
But the core engine of this community is POPS parents of PURA syndrome.
It is a private, tightly controlled Facebook group restricted entirely to primary caregivers.
And reading about it, I realized why that strict exclusivity is the whole point.
It has to be exclusive to be safe. When you are navigating the extreme fringes of medical complexity, standard empathy from well-meaning friends just falls short.
Right.
A parent needs a space where they can log on at 3:00 a.m., covered in their child's vomit after a massive seizure, and say, "The new anticonvulsant isn't working. I am terrified, and I deeply resent my life right now."
Yeah. And if you say that in a public forum, or even to extended family, you are met with shock, pity, or unhelpful platitudes.
Or judgment.
Exactly, judgment. But in POPS, you are met with fierce, lived solidarity. You are met by 50 other parents who say, "We see you. We survived that exact medication transition last year. Here is exactly how we manage the side effects."
It is peer-to-peer psychological triage that no hospital social worker can provide.
It is survival. And for those listening who might be in the diagnostic wilderness, dealing with all these intense symptoms but without the genetic confirmation yet, the community extends to organizations like SWAN UK.
Syndromes without a name?
Yes, providing that same lifeline in the dark.
Yeah.
But the PURA community isn't just focused on emotional survival. They are actively weaponizing their data to drive high-level molecular science.
This is truly the most breathtaking aspect of the Foundation's work. They manage a global patient registry and a biobank.
I really want to dissect how this works because I think it's so empowering for a parent to understand exactly what happens when they participate. Like, how does a parent authorizing a simple blood draw or allowing a small skin biopsy from their child translate into accelerating gene therapy?
Because biological material is the absolute bottleneck of rare disease research. You cannot study a mechanism, let alone cure it, without tissue to test it on.
Okay, that makes sense.
The Global Patient Registry aggregates the clinical data. It maps the natural history of the disease. A single neurologist might see one PURA patient in their entire career. They can't spot trends.
They're working in a vacuum.
Right. But when the registry pools 800 patients, scientists can suddenly see statistical patterns.
The onset of this specific type of myoclonic seizure typically happens at this age.
It illuminates the path. And the biobank. What happens with the skin biopsies?
The biobank provides the biological canvas.
Yeah.
Researchers take those skin cells provided by the children, and using advanced techniques, they reprogram them back into stem cells.
And then they grow them into neurons, brain cells, in a petri dish. They literally grow the patient's specific genetic mutation in the lab.
That is wild.
If a pharmaceutical company wants to screen 10,000 existing FDA-approved drugs to see if any of them accidentally stabilize the PUR alpha protein, they use the cells from the biobank. The families are quite literally providing the raw ore required to forge a treatment.
And the speed at which this research is moving is staggering. Look at the timeline we talked about. Discovered in 2014, by this 2024-2026 window, we are seeing a monumental paradigm shift. The absolute crown jewel of this recent era is what happened in May 2025.
The breakthrough collaboration between the Jackson Laboratory, universally known as JX, and the nonprofit JAX Tomorrow.
Yes. They successfully engineered a new CRISPR-Cas9 knockout mouse model that exhibits the core physiological features of human PURA syndrome, including the fatal seizures and the profound motor deficits. I want to spend some time here because this is a massive leap.
To grasp the magnitude of this, we really have to look at the divide between basic research and translational research.
Okay, break that down for us.
Basic research is what we've been doing for the last decade. Understanding that chromosome 5 is involved, identifying the PUR alpha protein's role in mRNA transport. It is the what and the how.
Right.
But translational research is the process of turning that knowledge into a targeted therapeutic, like a drug or a gene therapy, that can be injected into a human child to actually alter their disease course.
And the barrier to translational research is that you cannot test experimental, potentially dangerous gene therapies on a human child just to see what happens. You need an intermediary step.
You need a complex, living biological system with an intact autonomic nervous system. A petri dish of neurons is great for initial screening, sure, but it doesn't have a brainstem. It doesn't breathe. It can't have a seizure.
So you need an animal model.
Yes.
Yeah.
For years, the lack of a reliable, accurate animal model was the anchor dragging down PURA research.
So, enter CRISPR technology, the molecular scissors. Scientists at JX didn't just find a mouse with a similar problem, right? They purposefully went into the mouse genome, navigated to the exact equivalent of the 5q31.3 location, and used Cas9 to snip the DNA, intentionally knocking out the PURA allele to perfectly mimic the human P-Fe233del variant.
It is incredibly precise molecular engineering, and the result is a mouse that physically suffers from the same autonomic dysregulation, the same neurological cascades as the children we've been discussing.
It is heartbreaking that the mouse suffers, but it is clinically necessary, because now elite research institutions like the Florey Institute and the Murdoch Children's Research Institute in Australia, they have their testing ground.
They have a living proxy.
Exactly.
If they develop a novel antisense oligonucleotide, which is basically a synthetic strand of nucleic acid designed to boost the production of PUR alpha protein from the healthy remaining copy of the gene, they can inject it into the CRISPR mouse.
Yeah, and see what happens.
Yes. If the mouse's motor function improves and the fatal seizures stop, they have achieved preclinical validation. That is the golden ticket required by the FDA and the EMA to authorize human clinical trials. The mouse model bridges the gap between theoretical science and active clinical intervention.
From the very first medical description in 2014 to highly precise CRISPR-engineered translational models in just over a decade, the momentum is exponential.
It's unheard of, really.
And it is driven entirely by the symbiosis between brilliant molecular biologists and the relentless, exhausting, beautiful advocacy of the PURA families pushing for funding and providing the data.
It is a true testament to what an organized rare disease community can achieve. But, looking at that compressed timeline forces us to confront a very immediate, very complex horizon.
Yes, and this is the final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. We were looking at the legal guidance for the EHC plans earlier, and it emphasizes that starting in year 9, when a child is around 13 or 14 years old, the annual review must legally include a focus on preparing for adulthood.
Preparing for adulthood. In the context of PURA, that phrase carries massive, massive weight.
Let's do the math on the history we just discussed. PURA syndrome was only given a name in 2014. That means the very first cohort of children who are officially diagnosed with this specific syndrome, as infants are, right now, today, hitting puberty.
Yeah, they are approaching adolescence and early adulthood right now.
It is an entirely unprecedented demographic moment.
It really is the edge of the map.
What does the adult care landscape actually look like for a profoundly complex genetic syndrome that the adult medical establishment barely even knew existed a decade ago? Pediatric hospitals, for all their faults, are relatively well-versed in rare, complex neurodevelopmental diseases.
They have multidisciplinary clinics, they understand AAC devices, they have complex care coordinators.
But transitioning to the adult medical and social care system, it is notoriously referred to as falling off the cliff.
Falling off the cliff? It's terrifying.
Yeah.
You leave the holistic pediatric umbrella, and you are suddenly dealing with adult neurologists who specialize in strokes or Alzheimer's, adult orthopedic surgeons, and an adult social care system that is heavily siloed and dramatically underfunded.
The safety net basically disintegrates.
The adult system is simply not built for pediatric onset rare diseases of this severity. It just isn't.
No, it isn't.
No.
But here is the profound reality. As these pioneer children age, they and you, their parents, their carers, their resident experts, are going to be the ones writing the playbook for adult PRA care.
Yeah.
Just as you fought the local authorities for every single hour of speech therapy, just as you funded the biobanks and demanded the CRISPR mouse models, you are going to define what a dignified, medically supported, and thriving adulthood looks like for a person with PRA syndrome.
You will have to educate a completely new tier of medical professional.
You will. The medical world, the adult social care system, they don't have the answers yet. They're going to be taking notes from you.
Yeah.
Because you are the vanguard.
It is a heavy mantle to carry, but if the last 10 years of research and advocacy indicate anything, it is that this community is entirely capable of carrying it.
So, to the listener, to the parent walking through the supermarket ignoring the stairs, to the carer prepping the medical binder for tomorrow's neurology appointment, to the advocate staring down a local authority over an EHC plan, we see you.
We really do.
You know your child understands everything you say. You know the brilliant, complex, vibrant mind locked inside. And through your relentless advocacy, your meticulous documentation, and your boundless love, you are ensuring the rest of the world sees it too. Thank you for diving deep with us today.